Hi everyone, welcome to the October 16th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. On the show this week, we're going to take a look at some stakes races from Keeneland and Belmont Park. We're going to kick things off in Kentucky with the Raven Run Stakes being run at Keeneland on Saturday, going 7 furlongs for the 3-year-old fillies. Some top horses in that competitive race like Four Graces and Venetian Harbor. Then we're going to move up to New York where we discuss the late pick 5 sequence at Belmont Park on Saturday. The feature there is the Floral Park going 6 furlongs on the turf for the fillies and mares, but I'm going to discuss all of the races 6 through 10 in that late pick 5 sequence. Some interesting fields, a pretty competitive sequence, so we'll get to that towards the end of the show. But you might hear me using some singular pronouns to kick things off. That's because I'll be flying solo on the forecast this week. My usual co-host Craig had something come up, so he can't record with me this Friday. So I'll be taking you through these races, and we're starting off at Keeneland with that Raven Run Stakes. The favorite in here on the morning line is the number 5, Venetian Harbor, and I get that. She's coming off that loss to Gamine in the Grade 1 test last time at Saratoga. Can't fault any horse for losing to Gamine this summer. She was just in razor-sharp form going those one-turn races. Obviously, she lost the Kentucky Oaks, but that does not diminish what she accomplished in both the Acorn and the test. Perhaps the class relief is just going to put Venetian Harbor in the winner's circle, but I don't see her as some massive standout in this race, and frankly, I don't see why she should be a much shorter price than her main rival, Four Graces, and I actually prefer Four Graces, and I'm going to make her my top pick in this Raven run. I was quite taken with her performances going back to the Beaumont from the early summer, and then especially last time in the 8 Bells. Although she lost the 8 Bells, she only gained in stature and defeat that day, at least in my estimation, because she was dueling with a very quick Monday call through the opening portions of that race. She put that filly away at the top of the stretch and just got swallowed up by a very good closer, Sconson, who she had previously beaten in the Beaumont. Four Graces, she won the battle that day, just couldn't quite win the war. I still thought it was an excellent effort, and now she's going her preferred 7 furlong distance. While she does have to deal with speed to her outside, like from horses such as Venetian Harbor or even Secret Keeper on the outside, I think Julien Leparoux is going to make the right call on her and put her in the game. That's how she likes to run her best races, just take it to the rest of the field and try to outrun them. And I just think she might be the best horse in this race. So she'll be my top pick in here, but there are definitely some others to consider once you get past these 2 favorites. And one of the other horses that I would definitely want to use pretty prominently is that other speed horse that I just mentioned on the outside, the number 10, Secret Keeper. What has this filly done wrong in her first 3 career starts? She was pretty impressive winning her first 2 career starts sprinting in California. Then they tried 2 turns last time in that Torrey Pines, and I thought she put in an excellent race that day, arguably the best performance of her career. She was dueling through some pretty quick fractions, going the mile. That opening quarter was very fast. The horse that she was dueling with in the early stages of that race ended up finishing, I think, back in 5th, beaten a long ways. And she got beaten by Harvest Moon, but that performance has only been flattered in retrospect as Harvest Moon came back and won the Grade 2 Zenyatta against older horses out of that race, beating Ollie's Candy as well as Fighting Mad, the 2 older favorites in that Zenyatta. So I think that Torrey Pines was a strong race, and Secret Keeper, she should appreciate the turn back in distance to the 7 furlongs. I think this is the right kind of spot for her, and she's drawn well outside of the other speed, so she could get a better trip than even Four Graces. So I'm focusing mostly on these 2, and if there's a big disparity in price, if Secret Keeper is close to that 12-1 on the morning line, I don't think she will be. To me, she looks like she should be about half of that price, but if she's a big price in this race, she's definitely a horse that I would look at betting to win. Just some others that I think you could consider, because the TimeformUS pace projector is predicting a fast pace. So I guess in that situation, you do want to take a look at some of the closers. I personally think most of the closers in this race are just inferior to the 3 fillies that I mentioned. I suppose if you were going to look at a late runner, maybe you would highlight a horse like number 4, Finite. I just don't know where Finite is at this point. She was so good going back to the springtime, but she didn't really take that step forward coming into the races in February and March from her 2-year-old form. She ran that 1 big speed figure in the Rachel Alexandra, but then stepped back after that, was off for a long time. For whatever reason, they tried the turf off the layoff last time. I just don't know where she is right now, and given her name recognition, maybe she won't be a bettable price in this race. Frankly, if I was going to use another horse somewhere underneath, it would be the number 8, Fair Maiden. This filly got an absolutely perfect trip last time when she returned from the layoff in that allowance race at Churchill Downs, but she still ran a pretty fast speed figure that day, and she strikes me as one that shouldn't mind coming from a little bit farther off the pace. She's a big, strapping filly who looks like she's going to handle the dirt. That was her first dirt race last time at Churchill Downs, even though she had run only on turf and synthetic in her prior starts. She obviously handled the transition to dirt, and I think she's going to be able to stand up against this tougher company. She's going to have to come from farther off the pace than she ever has before, but she's one that I would definitely look to use underneath in exactas and trifectas. Now let's move on to that late pick 5 sequence at Belmont Park on Saturday, kicking things off with the 6th race. It's a maiden special weight for the 2-year-olds, going 6 furlongs on the inner turf course. Now, I should mention, I'm going to talk about these races like they're on the turf. There clearly is a possibility they could come off the turf, any number of these, because there's plenty of rain predicted to fall on Friday. It's already starting where I am in Queens, coming down pretty hard, and all the races are off the turf at Belmont Park on Friday. So we'll see what they do with the Saturday races. I would imagine that some come off the turf. We'll see which ones they are. But assuming the 6th race stays on the turf, you've got 2 horses with turf experience who are probably going to take most of the money, those being the number 10 Voter Protection and the number 4 Texas Basin. They both come out of the same race behind 2nd of July, and 2nd of July was a 68-1 debut winner of that race. He obviously came back last week and validated that performance by winning the Futurity in his next start, so he's 2 for 2 in his career. I'm still not totally convinced about the quality of that race that 2nd of July won, so I don't really know what I want to do with Voter Protection and Texas Basin in this race and how heavily I really want to lean on these horses. Looking at their trips in that start, the pace was slow, so they were both compromised in that sense. So they had different trips behind that slow pace. Voter Protection saved ground on the rail most of the way, angled out in the stretch, and just really couldn't make up ground into a very fast final quarter mile. Texas Basin broke a little bit slowly, was towards the back of the pack down the backstretch. Then he made a big, wide, premature move on the far turn to reach contention at the quarter pole. But then once the field started really running and sprinting home through the last quarter mile, they left him in the dust, and he faded in the final quarter. I guess Texas Basin had the slightly tougher trip because he made that premature move, but he made that move into the slowest portion of the race because they did slow things down through that second quarter mile. So I don't know how much extra credit he really deserves for the move that he made in that race. And I just wanted to look at some new faces who haven't tried the turf yet or don't really have any experience yet. The one that I made my top pick is the number 7, Charleston Strong. He'll be making his turf debut in this race. Now, Flatter's not the best turf sire, so that might be working against him, but there is turf pedigree on the dam side. Both of her foals to race have preferred the turf so far, especially her winner, Gravitas, who I think has only raced on the turf, and he's won a couple races in the Mid-Atlantic region. Charleston Strong debuted on the dirt at Saratoga back in August, I should say, against a pretty tough field. That was the one that was won by Founder over Highly Motivated, those 2 Chad Brown horses who both look pretty talented. And Charleston Strong was off a bit slowly, made a middle move, leaving the backstretch around the far turn, and just kind of stayed on evenly in the stretch. Watching him come through the slop in the stretch of that race, he seemed like one to me that had that high striding action, like he should be able to transfer that form to the turf, and now he's just getting on a surface that he might be able to handle a little bit better. And it's not like this seems as if it's the toughest field, so I think it's a good spot to try this surface for the first time. So he'd be my top pick over those 2 horses with turf experience. One other horse that I would want to use if this race is on the turf is a first-time starter, and that's the number 11, Coach P. Dave Canizzo is not a trainer that's really known for first-out success. He did have 1 debut winner at Saratoga this summer, but they're typically few and far between for this barn. I will say, of all the horses in this race, he might have the most convincing pedigree for sprinting on the turf because he's by the quick sire Distorted Humor, and his dam, Eileen's Dream, she was a confirmed turf sprinter during her racing career. She had a ton of speed, would open up big leads in some of her turf sprint races during her career, and didn't want to go much farther than 5.5 furlongs. So there is plenty of speed in this pedigree. I like this horse's 2-year-old sales work from back in July when he went 10-1 over the synthetic surface. He had that same high striding action, looks like a horse who should be able to transfer his form to the turf. So he's one that I'd be interested in of the first-time starters, and I think it's interesting that Louis Saez is taking the mount for a barn that he doesn't ride for that often. That could be a good sign. So I would focus mostly on Charleston Strong and Coach P, also using those 2 horses with turf experience, Texas Basin and Voter Protection. Next leg of this Pick 5 sequence is race 7, also a maiden special weight on the turf. This one, though, for the older New York breds. And seems like a pretty wide open race among those entered for turf. Wasn't really sure where to go on the morning line or how they were going to bet this race. I guess the number 1 Striking Causeway is one that's going to take some money based on that narrow loss at this level last time at Saratoga when he was second by a neck going 5.5 furlongs. This horse does have a lot of speed, and I would imagine that Irad Ortiz is going to use it breaking from the rail in this race. I'd be a little bit concerned, though, about him getting the 7 furlongs, especially over turf courses with some give to it. I'm just not sure how much stamina this horse really possesses, and I'd want to lead another direction if this horse is going to be a short price. The ones with turf experience that I think are more reliable are horses like the number 2, the Golden Door, who ran pretty well, stretching out to the mile on the 16th last time. Pretty drastic to go from 5.5 furlongs in his debut all the way out to that route distance in his second start, and I thought he handled it pretty well. The winner of that race, Advanced Strategy, he had been hanging around the maiden ranks for a while, but he's a pretty talented horse, so it's no disgrace losing to him. And I think the Golden Door might just be finding his sweet spot here as he turns back slightly to the 7 furlong distance. That could really work for him, and especially if there's some pace in this race. He's a horse that comes from off the pace, so I think that could work out where he gets a good trip in here. So I just think he's very logical. But there are some other horses in this race that I think deserve a look, like the number 10 Scuttlebuzz. In both of his turf starts, he's run very well. He's a horse that definitely has trouble getting out of the gate. In the past, he did that, and I think all 4 of his first starts, he broke slowly. He did finally get out of the gate better last time, though it didn't matter so much because he was going a route distance that day, and he still found himself towards the back of the pack because he just does have that closing running style by nature. The other kind of character flaw that Scuttlebuzz has is he tends to get a little bit headstrong in his races. He can get pretty rank under Javier Castellano, and that's not something you want to see on the turf where you really do want your horses to settle and make that one run. So there are definitely some things working against Scuttlebuzz just in his own mind, but this horse does have real talent, and I think 7 furlongs is the right kind of distance for him, so I don't want to totally dismiss him. He's definitely a horse that I would use in this race along with the Golden Door. My top pick, though, would be the number 9 Bernardino. This is a horse that he's only made 3 starts as a 5-year-old, so there are clearly some physical issues here. But he did come back off the very long layoff last time, and I thought put in a pretty encouraging effort at Saratoga. Not easy to go a mile on the 16th off that kind of lengthy break, and he finished a good second behind Ancient Times, who looked pretty impressive winning that day. Obviously, Ancient Times did not come back and run particularly well in his second start, but it might kind of be an apples and oranges situation because something clearly went wrong with Ancient Times next time out. But Bernardino, I thought he ran well that day. He's a horse that I had even liked going all the way back to his first couple of starts in 2018 because I thought he got a couple of trips, particularly his first race against the New York breds, and then he was in over his head second time out. He's a horse also that I think could like the turn back to 7 furlongs because if you look at his pedigree, his 2 best half siblings, Man of Fire and Given Fire, were both turf sprinters, so I like that this horse is going a little bit shorter in this race, and the fact that Louis Saez is keeping the mount for this barn I think is a pretty good sign. So he's just the biggest price of all the contenders that I was considering, so I put him on top, though this is a race that I would spread a little bit. I would use those aforementioned horses like Scuttlebuzz and the Golden Door, and I'd even throw in Not Far Now, the first time turfer for Linda Rice. This horse is out of the dam Kibosh, who was a multiple turf winner. The dam's one horse to race out of orbit was more of a dirt horse, but there's definitely pedigree even from the top side with American Pharaoh for this horse to handle the turf, so I would use that one as well. Mostly 2, 3, 9, and 10 for me in the second leg of that pick 5 sequence. Moving on to the 8th race at Belmont, the third leg of this pick 5 sequence. It's a non-winners of 1 allowance race for New York breds going a mile on the 16th on the dirt. And we've got a pretty clear favorite in this race in the number 4 Cold Hard Cash. This horse might just be too good for this field. I don't want to be really against him at a short price because based on his last race at Saratoga where he won that starter allowance race going a mile and an eighth, he might just be a little too good for this field. He was able to kind of duck the New York bred company briefly to win that starter allowance. Now he's back in against New York breds, but it's really a lateral move. It's not like this is a tougher field than he was facing last time. He got a 102 TimeformUS speed figure for that race, an 87 buyer. I initially had some doubts about that number for the other horses in that field. It seemed a little high, but some horses that finished behind him have come back to validate that speed figure, especially the TimeformUS number. So seems pretty legitimate to me. And Cold Hard Cash is a horse that showed some promise early on, took him a few races to get going, struggling coming back from that COVID layoff back in the summer, but it seems like he really got things together now. And if he runs back to his last race for Linda Rice, he's just going to be super tough to beat in here. I'm not really against him, but I do want to use one other horse in this race, and actually the horse that I made my top pick, just because he's going to be a better price, is the number 1 Farragut. He's a horse that I've been chasing a little bit, I'll admit that, since early in his career. He actually ran very well despite losing his first couple of starts, and he's a horse that I've always wanted to see go longer distances, even though they primarily sprinted him throughout his career. It's not a great sign that it took him so long to break his maiden. It actually took him 8 starts to do that. He finally broke through 2 back at Saratoga, going 6 furlongs. But I think it's interesting that after he finally broke his maiden going the 6 furlongs, they're again doing what I wanted to see them do all along, stretching him back out in distance. And they did that last time when he went a mile in his first start against Winners. And I just thought he got the wrong trip that day. I mean, this is a horse who led gate to wire to win his maiden race going 6 furlongs. And for whatever reason, he was off the pace going a mile in his next start with a much slower pace. That's kind of hard to explain. When you watch the race, though, you can kind of see he got pushed in a little bit after the start. And after that, Eric Consell, who was on him that day, just pretty much grabbed him and took him towards the back of the pack. And Farragut wanted to do more coming down the back stretch. Consell had a pretty good hold on him. He ended up going 4 wide around the far turn, made a brief premature move, really though to nowhere at the quarter pole. He ranged up alongside while out in the middle of the track and just flattened out after that in a race that was pretty much dominated by horses that were close to the pace or down towards the inside. I just think Farragut deserves a pass for that race, and given the pace situation that he faces here, even though Eric Consell is not always the most aggressive rider, his connections have to know that they have to send this horse in this race because there is not much speed signed on whatsoever, and he's got the rail this time, so he should just use his speed drawn inside of Cold Hard Cash, set the pace with Cold Hard Cash stalking on the outside, and see if he can hold on. If you look at the TimeformUS pace projector, it's a situation favoring horses on or near the lead, and I think the number 1 Farragut should just take advantage of that situation and try to take this field gate to wire. He really has a pedigree that suggests longer distances should be better, and I think he ran deceptively well in his 2 prior races going a mile before he tried it last time. So if he gets the right trip, I just have to give him one more chance going the route distance on the dirt, but I'm under no illusions that Cold Hard Cash is going to be easy to beat in this race. I really do think he's a deserving favorite. Moving on to the penultimate leg of this pick 5 sequence, it's the 9th race, the Floral Park, going 6 furlongs on the inner turf course. Again, we'll see if this stays on the turf. I think if they do keep any of the races on the turf on Saturday, they try to keep the stakes race on, so we can, I think, talk about this race with some confidence that'll be on the turf. It's a pretty competitive field of fillies and mares going the 6 furlong distance. I think there are 11 entered for turf. You can make a pretty strong case for a lot of them. Let's start, though, with the favorite, the number 6, Mitchell Road. I made her the lukewarm favorite on the morning line at 3-1. She's just a difficult horse to gauge in this race because she's turning back to a sprint distance on the turf for the first time, and she's just routed really throughout her entire career on the turf, going distances of around a mile, sometimes out to a mile and 1/16. That's really her sweet spot, and it's just kind of an unknown whether she can handle this drastic turn back to 6 furlongs. Some horses that are routers on the turf just can't translate that form to sprint distances, and it pretty much remains to be seen with her. You've also got the wet turf course to deal with, because I do think there's still going to be plenty of give in the ground on Saturday, and it's not the kind of going that she handled 2 back when she tried at Dallas Park. She was a short price in that Kentucky Downs preview ladies race that day, and she just never got involved, and I think finished last in that field of 11. The turf course at Kentucky Downs last time was listed as yielding, and she handled it. I don't know how soft that turf course really was at Kentucky Downs, because the final time for a mile was 1:34. That's not really indicative of the course that has that much give to it. So we'll take that with a grain of salt. But what I'm really worried about with Mitchell Road is the turn back in distance and the fact that she could have to come from off the pace in this race with some quicker sprinters in here, because she is a horse that does her best running on the lead, and she hasn't always been effective, sometimes gets discouraged when she has to rate behind horses in the early going. So at a short price, she's one that I wanted to sort of veer away from. The other short price on the morning line is the number 8, Lead Guitar, and she is a horse that I liked a lot last time when she got back in George Weaver's barn in that optional claiming race. race. She went this distance that day, though over a firm turf course, and also a situation where she was able to get to the front end under Luis Saez in a paceless situation. And that really did help her because her main rivals in that race were closers, particularly Madeline Must and Olandon, and they were just way up against it from a pace standpoint as lead guitar set that slow pace and just sprinted away in the stretch. I do think it's going to be a slightly more competitive pace situation this time, though I don't want to totally discount this horse because she does have good prior figures as well, particularly when she was in George Weaver's barn in the past. I'm not sure why she didn't perform up to that level when she was with Eddie Keneally in Kentucky, but her races for George Weaver are superior, and I think based on that speed figure last time she's a player in this race. I just didn't want to take her again, given that I cashed with her last time at a short price in this much tougher spot, but I don't deny that she's a horse that can certainly win this race. I just thought there were other places to go to find more value. A horse that I think is going to attract a lot of support and potentially even get bet down off that 6-1 that I made around the morning line is the number 9 Rose Flower. And there's good reason for that, because if you just look at Rose Flower's recent past performances, she doesn't quite stack up against this field. She's never really run a speed figure that puts her in the mix. But when you start to read between the lines and take apart her form, there are plenty of reasons to believe she's going to run a new career top in this race. She had no chance in her only start of 2020 in that Intercontinental. That was over a turf course that had plenty of give to it. It was also one that seemed to be maybe favoring speed a little bit, and she was just facing a much better field as Newspaper of Record wired that parade of Chad Brown horses. I think Chad Brown finished 1, 2, 3, 4 in that Intercontinental over Regal, Glory, Significant Form, and Viadera. They're all superior to the horses that are in this race, so I can't fault Rose Flower for losing that race. And the time that she was seen prior to that, you have to go all the way back to December of 2019 when she was third behind today's rival Saratoga Treasure in that Autumn Days. But if you watch that race, you can say with some certainty that Rose Flower probably should have won because Joel Rosario, that was not his finest ride. Rosario, I'm a fan of his on the turf, especially in sprints. He takes some chances. It works out quite a bit for him, but sometimes it just blows up in his face, and that's what happened in the Autumn Days last year. He tried to save some ground on the far turn with this horse, but just had nowhere to go in the stretch. He was caught behind a wall of horses and really didn't find a seam to run until the final 16th of a mile, which she shot through for third and had a ton of acceleration coming through the wire, but just was left with way too much to do to make up the ground that she was spotted in the field coming into the stretch. So I think Rose Flower has more ability than it might seem based on her U.S. performances, but I would want a price on her because you're not supposed to bet a horse like this at a short price that has lower speed figures than all of the other main contenders. So I'm using her, but I'd watch the tote board. My top pick, though, in this race is one that I don't think is going to be that big of a price. She'll probably be around the third or fourth choice, but just a horse that I think makes a ton of sense, and that's the number 5 Xanthique. Feels like she's a filly that's just in great form right now for Tom Morley. They took a bit of a risk turning her back in distance two back at Saratoga when they went from the mile all the way back to the 5.5 furlongs, but it really worked out for her. She seemed to have no trouble showing improved tactical speed and handling the 5.5 furlong distance that day, beat many of the same horses that Lead Guitar did when she won her optional claiming race in that next start. Horses like Olandon and Originaire. Originaire came back to win next time, I believe at Churchill Downs with a similar speed figure, so validating that number. Last time out, they took a shot in a lucrative race at Kentucky Downs, stretching back out in distance with Xanthique, and I thought she ran deceptively well in that Kentucky Downs race because she is a filly that does her best work when she's up close to the lead, using that tactical speed that she has, and she broke sort of with the field, but wasn't ridden that aggressively from an inside post position in that one Dreamer, and just sort of got shuffled back towards the rear end of the field, and that was a race that was mostly dominated towards the front end. Delica, who won the race, is typically a closer, but she was ridden from the front end in that race, and nobody really made up ground from the back of the pack, except for Xanthique, who was passing horses pretty quickly in the stretch, but was sort of in between horses and down towards the inside, and just couldn't really get herself into the clear in the late stages of that race. I think it's a better performance than it seems. And that's those last two efforts. Those are the best efforts for her career. It seems like she's just coming into this race with a positive pattern, and the 6 furlongs, it should work for her. Furthermore, speaking of the track condition, she is the one horse in this race, if there is one, that has handled turf courses with plenty of given them in the past. I think twice she's been competitive over yielding going, so she's one that should not be hindered by some rain that fell on Friday. So I'd focus mostly on them. I guess I could give a slight look to the long shot, the number 4 Get Mother a Rose. She's one of my pets. She's a horse that I've liked going back to last winter and have picked a number of times in the past. It seems like she's a little off form right now, but she does have races in her that put her in the mix. So maybe I'll use her as a backup in a pick 5 sequence, because this is a race that I think you can spread in a little bit because there are many horses to potentially use. And let's close things out with the last race at Belmont on Saturday. And this one's another doozy. I think you could really characterize this as another potential spread race. Many contenders in this New York bred optional claiming, non-winners of 2 other than going 7 furlongs on the dirt. Though I will say that the horse to beat, and I think the horse to beat pretty clearly, is the number 4 Good Credence, just because you've got a lot of fillies with inconsistent form, and she has run 3 good races in a row, which is more than you can say about the others. Her last 2 in particular, I think, have been solid efforts. She lost to a couple of common rivals, 2 back behind JC Shooting Star and Let Me Take This Call. But she followed up that performance with another really strong effort last time at Belmont Park, finishing second to the vastly improved Prairie Fire. And in that race, I didn't think she got the best trip. There was not much speed signed on. Good Credence looked like a horse that should have been forwardly placed, and for whatever reason, her rider was not that aggressive breaking from the inside. She sort of got shuffled back through the opening quarter mile, ended up having to come from farther off the pace than I think you would have expected. All things considered, she ran well to be second, has earned 2 speed figures in a row that put her right in the mix here. She should have no trouble handling the 7 furlongs. I just think she makes a lot of sense as the potential favorite in this race. I like her more than the other short prices. Horses like the number 2 Archie My Baby. She loves to win races, so I don't want to be too hard on this horse. But the race that she exits 2 back when she won at Saratoga against Claim & Company, a number of horses have come back out of that race to run significantly slower speed figures in their subsequent starts, so I'm a little bit wary of the form of that race overall. She is one of those horses who came back and ran poorly next time, losing at this level, finishing 4th as one of the favorites. That was over a sloppy track, so maybe you can give her the excuse and say getting back on a fast track, she'll be more competitive. But just in general, I think her form is a little bit slower than some of the other top contenders in here. Coming out of that race, Let Me Take This Call, and Archie My Baby exit, I'd actually be more inclined to take the number 9 Love and Love, who's trying to get back on track after coming off a layoff 2 back. She has a horse that showed some good form over the winter at Aqueduct, winning a starter allowance race and finishing a good, or actually winning at the non-winners of 1 level back in March. Obviously, the layoff threw her off a little bit, and it's taken her a couple starts to get back on track. But I think she's coming into this race with the right kind of pattern. So I would use her as one of my backups in here. Though my top pick is one that should be a bigger price, and that's the number 1 Playtone. She is a horse who showed some ability as a 2-year-old last year, actually earned a 76 buyer, I think a 97 TimeformUS speed figure, when she broke her maiden at Belmont almost exactly a year ago on October 19th of 2019, drawing off impressively by 6 lengths that day. She wouldn't have to improve much on that performance now as a 3-year-old to be competitive against this field. The problem is she did go a little bit off form at Aqueduct over the winter, had some performances that don't quite measure up against a field like this. They put her away for a long time. She came back in August. You can excuse that return race because she stumbled very badly at the start. She took a few stumbling steps. Her nose almost went down to the dirt. Really just a stumble that can make you draw a line through that performance. Then last time out, they put her in an ambitious spot in the Fleet Indian Stakes. 1 mile and 1/8 is probably too far for her under any circumstances, but especially against that kind of company, so I can give her a pass for that race, and she didn't even run that badly, all things considered. Got a 98 TimeformUS speed figure, a 68 buyer. Those numbers put her in the mix here, and I think that she's going to be able to improve once again, turning back to 7 furlongs, which could be the ideal distance for her. Another thing I like about Playtone is that if you watch her races, she's a horse that has this bad tendency to lug in throughout the entirety of her races, especially in the stretch. And she's one that just has this tendency to drift down towards the rail. And given the fact that she's drawn the rail in this race, I think she might be able to work out a much more comfortable trip running the way that she wants to run. And if you look through her PPs, the one other time that she drew the rail was actually when she broke her maiden here last year. So I think that could be a situation that just ends up working out for Playtone. So if she's around that 10-1 morning line, she's definitely a horse that I would bet to win. And I'd also use her in this pick 5 sequence as an A, along with the number 4 Good Credence, who, as I said, is just the horse to beat in this last leg of the sequence. Pretty tough series of races at Belmont Park. You can make the case that many of these races are some spread races, though I think we can narrow it down in a few places, especially in that middle leg, the 8th race on the dirt for New York breds. That's one where I would just go too deep. But it could get pretty expensive. Also, though, a sequence that, if it stays on the turf, could pay pretty nicely, because I think that there are some vulnerable favorites throughout these 5 races. Well, that's all the racing for this week. I hope I gave out some good ideas and hopefully a few winners on these 6 races that we discussed. And I'm also hopeful that Craig will be back on Tuesday when we do the TimeformUS Pacecast to recap these races, some things to look back on. And as I said on the TimeformUS Pacecast earlier this week, at some point we're going to start doing some Breeders' Cup previews, looking at some of the contenders ahead of those races before the pre-entries come out. So we'll schedule that and I'll let you know, and we're going to do that podcast as well. So some things to look forward to on the TimeformUS podcast. Remember, you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back with the TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday.